Hello friends, welcome to today's lecture, and this is also the last lecture for the course. I am going to revise some of the things that we have already done, primarily listening, reading, some comprehension, completing statements, true and false, collocations that we started last week, and also test idioms. Now, I am going to read out 3 lengthy passages to you one after another. You will be shown only the questions. Please look at the questions carefully and look at the slide here. When I read the passage, you will not be shown the passage because this is a test of your listening. Please remember that, not reading. When I do reading today, you will be looking at the passage, but when I am listening, you will see only the questions. Please try to respond to the questions as I read out the passages. You are going to have 3 lengthy passages testing your listening abilities. Look at the first slide. This is listening 1, questions. Look at the questions here. I am going to start reading the passage now. You will be looking at the slide with questions. The Ming dynasty was marked by the wide range of public works and accomplishments. Apart from the repair of the Great Wall of China and the establishment of the Forbidden City, separation of cities and rural areas were also pushed to create an increase in production for Chinese farms to be used for storage and trade. By the turn of the 16th century, China's economy was fueled by trade with various countries and nationalities, some of which are the Spanish, Dutch and Portuguese. Chinese merchants became involved in global trading of plants, animals and food. Meanwhile, great quantities of silver came into the country through commerce with the Europeans and the Japanese. This occurrence paved the way for the change of currency in China from copper and paper to silver notes. Aside from its growing economy, China's arts, culture and sciences also experienced burgeoning growth during the Ming rule. Artists produced great paintings and there was an abundance of fine porcelain, exquisite lacquer and other art crafts. The production of dictionaries and books in philosophy and the sciences marked an era of greater intellectualism among the Chinese. Aside from these, novels like Water Margin and Journey to the West, both of which were written in vernacular Chinese, were deemed as few of the most important classical pieces in Chinese literature. Another remarkable accomplishment during the Ming dynasty was the reform of the military forces that resulted to its fast and essential expansion. The Chinese military, which were considered low members of the society before the Ming dynasty, have risen not only in social status as individuals, but have also become more solid and more fortified as a front. Look at the questions. Apart from the repair of the Great Wall of China and the establishment of the Forbidden City, separation of cities and rural areas were also pushed to and complete the sentence. With which countries in the 16th century was China engaged in trade? During the Ming dynasty, that is third question, dash became China's major form of currency. Number 4, name the 2 major novels produced in China during this period. 5th, one of the art crafts in China was light feather. State true or false. Last question, number 6. There were no dictionaries during the Ming dynasty. State true or false. And look at the answers now. These are your answers. Apart from the repair of the Great Wall of China and the establishment of the Forbidden City, separation of cities and rural areas were also pushed to create an increase in production for Chinese farms to be used for storage and trade. Second, by the turn of the 16th century, China's economy was fueled by trade with various countries and nationalities, some of which are the Spanish, Dutch and Portuguese. These are the 3 countries. And the third is silver notes, currency in China, from copper and paper to silver notes. Please look at the next slide, the names of the novels, Water Margin and Journey to the West. Number 5, it is a false statement, it is not light feather, but expensive lacquer and porcelain. And number 6, false, the production of dictionaries was there and books in philosophy and the sciences marked an era of greater intellectualism among the Chinese. Let us look at the second set. You will be again shown only the slide with questions. I will read out the listening passage for you. I begin. The fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, led to the emergence of European feudalism. Romans in Europe returned to their homeland, leaving European lands without organization and the system of Roman centralization. The disintegration of Europe following the departure and power of the Romans slowly led to European feudalism. The first elements of European feudalism appeared in France and Germany in the 9th and 10th centuries. This coincided with the great military force organized by the Normans. Elements of the Roman regime were transferred to European feudalism. Roman villas and their lands were granted to military leaders on a temporary basis as a reward for their loyalty to Rome and the emperor. It was also traditional for Romans to surround themselves with loyal soldiers who provided a substantial fighting force and offered protection. These ideas were adopted in Europe. European nobles increased their power from grants of land from the king in return for military service. European feudalism was born. The hierarchy of European feudalism occurred with ease. A natural pyramid shaped hierarchy had already developed, headed by the king, who was surrounded by nobles. The urge for the great countries of Europe to fight and acquire new lands and territories led to the hierarchy of European feudalism and its main advantage, which was that men who were not of noble birth could climb up the feudalism pyramid of power. If a man proved himself in battle and as a loyal supporter he was rewarded with land called a fief. In return for the land, the loyal supporter or vassal would swear an oath of fealty and pay homage to his lord or king. Look at the questions. What was the most important reason for the rise of feudalism in Europe? Question 2. The first European feudalism started in dash and dash. Number 3, what were the Roman elements adopted in European system of feudalism? Number 4, in return for the land, the loyal supporter or vassal would swear and dash and pay homage to his lord or king. And here are your answers. So, the reason for the growth of feudalism in Europe. The fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, led to the emergence of European feudalism. Romans in Europe returned to their homeland, leaving European lands without organization and the system of Roman centralization. The disintegration of Europe following the departure and power of the Romans slowly led to European feudalism. Second question, first countries to have feudalism, Germany and France, and grants of land were the most important aspect of feudalism. And the answer for the last one, fill in the blank, is oath of fealty. Now, look at the passage. This is the passage that I have just read to you. Look at the passage now. The fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, led to the emergence of European feudalism. Romans in Europe returned to their homeland, leaving European lands without organization and the system of Roman centralization. The disintegration of Europe following the departure and power of the Romans slowly led to European feudalism. The first elements of European feudalism appeared in France and Germany in the 9th and 10th centuries. This coincided with a great military force organized by the Romans. Elements of the Roman regime were transferred to European feudalism. Roman villas and their lands were granted to military leaders on a temporary basis as a reward for their loyalty to Rome and the emperor. It was also traditional for Romans to surround themselves with loyal soldiers who provided a substantial fighting force and offered protection. These ideas were adopted in Europe. European nobles increased their power from grants of land from the king in return for military service. European feudalism was born. And look at the slide here, and this is the source of the passage. You can go through the slide. And I will also show you the slide, the first reading passage that I had just read, the Ming dynasty. Please look at this. The Ming dynasty was marked by the wide range of public works and accomplishments. Apart from the repair of the Great Wall of China and the establishment of the Forbidden City, separation of cities and rural areas were also pushed to create an increase in production for Chinese farms to be used for storage and trade. By the turn of the 16th century, China's economy was fueled by trade with various countries and nationalities, some of which are the Spanish, Dutch and Portuguese. Chinese merchants became involved in global trading of plants, animals and food. Meanwhile, great quantities of silver came into the country through commerce with the Europeans and the Japanese. This occurrence paved the way for the change of currency in China from copper and paper to silver notes. And look at this slide and the source. Now, look at the third slide. Please look at the questions. This is all you will be shown now while I read out the passage. It was largely due to Louis Armstrong's powerful playing that jazz changed into a music that put the focus on brilliant and adventurous soloists. During his year with Henderson, Armstrong became a major influence not only on other brass players, but on musicians of all instruments. His swinging solos were emulated by others, and by the time he moved back to Chicago in late 1925, jazz had moved a decade ahead of where it was in 1923. Soon there were many trumpeters who sounded like relatives of Armstrong. It was not until the bebop era began 20 years later that jazz trumpeters inspired by Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis moved beyond Armstrong to look for other musical role models. In addition to popularizing scatting, Louis Armstrong's relaxed phrasing in his singing, which like his trumpet playing made perfect use of space, was a revelation to other vocalists. He altered melody lines to give them catchier rhythms and changed lyrics when it suited his voice and his conception of the song. Among those who became influenced by his phrasing while adapting it to their own musical personalities were Bing Crosby, who brought jazz phrasing into pop music, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, and Ella Fitzgerald, among countless others. Look at the questions now. It was largely due to Louis Armstrong's powerful playing that jazz changed into a music that put the focus on brilliant and adventurous. During his year with Henderson, Armstrong became a major influence not only on other players, on other dash players, but on musicians of all instruments. Name the two major figures of the bebop era. Number 4, how did Armstrong made perfect use of space? Number 5, who were the artists who became influenced by Armstrong's phrasing? And these are the answers. First one, it was largely due to Louis Armstrong's powerful playing that jazz changed into a music that put the focus on brilliant and adventurous. So, Louis. Second, during his year with Henderson, Armstrong became a major influence not only on other brass players, but on musicians of all instruments. Number 3, bebop era musicians Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis. Number 4, what is the relevance of his phrasing? A perfect use of space. So, Louis Armstrong's relaxed phrasing in his singing, which like his trumpet playing made perfect use of space, was a revelation to other vocalists. And musicians who were influenced by Armstrong: Bing Crosby, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, and Ella Fitzgerald. Let us look at the passage that I have just read out. It was largely due to Louis Armstrong's powerful playing that jazz changed into a music that put the focus on brilliant and adventurous soloists. During his year with Henderson, Armstrong became a major influence not only on other brass players, but on musicians of all instruments. His swinging solos were emulated by others, and by the time he moved back to Chicago in late 1925, jazz had moved a decade ahead of where it was in 1923. Soon there were many trumpeters who sounded like relatives of Armstrong. It was not until the bebop era began 20 years later that jazz trumpeters inspired by Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis moved beyond Armstrong to look for other musical role models. And go through this slide and the source here. All right. Now, let us look at this passage. This is your reading. 5 years ago, James Shapiro, an American academic, took the international world of Shakespeare by storm with a brilliant idea and dash. So, which word is more appropriate, intimate or intimidating? History of the playwright through the prism of a single year. 1599, A Year in the Life of William Shakespeare, was one of those books that seemed so obvious it's amazing no one had thought of it before. Shapiro's chosen date was a dash, inspired or inspirational? The Annus Mirabilis, in which Shakespeare wrote Henry V, Julius Caesar, and As You Like It back to back. Please look at the slide carefully and try to respond. And here is the answer. And intimate, not intimidating. Intimidating means someone that is scary, that puts some fear or pressure. Intimate is a very personal. So, one personal year, 1 year in the life of the great playwright William Shakespeare. So, intimate history, very personalized and very a close look at at a year in Shakespeare's life. So, intimate. And the next one is chosen date was inspired. Like this is really a very well chosen, admirable date. Okay? Not inspirational. It is not like giving inspiration to anyone. There is nothing preachy about it. Inspired date is, it is something that is really wise and it is really a very unique. So, that is how you use the word. So, first Answer is intimate, second is inspired. Both are adjectives. Let us look at this passage, reading 2. Then came the curse of the, which should be the word sequel or sequence. Word filtered back from the publishers that Shapiro's next book would pull the same trick with 1605-06, the year of Macbeth and King Lear. Seasons passed, Shakespeare's life continued to pop up on the bestseller lists. David Tennant's Hamlet came and went. Finally, in January, along came the first proof of Shapiro's new book, entitled Contested Will. It bared or bore a fatal subtitle, Who Wrote Shakespeare? Apparently, Professor Shapiro had gone over to the dark side, the blasted heath of the authors or authorship question. Please look at the slide carefully. And here are your answers. Curse of the sequel, not sequence. Sequel is what follows. So, we often say this is a sequel to a best seller or to a blockbuster movie. So, a book that he had written and thus its sequel, what follows. So, not a sequence. And the next word is proof or prove. So, a book always have proofs, not prove. It did not prove anything, it was a proof, first proof of a book. So, proof is the right word. And then last is authorship question, not author's question, because see authorship is, look at the phrase that has, or look at the title of Who Wrote Shakespeare. So, whether Shakespeare himself wrote his plays or not, that has always been a very controversial or contested issue. So, authorship, not author's question, the author is not posing any question, although it looks like it, but the blasted heath of the authorship question, Shakespeare's authorship is questioned here. And I want you to look at these idioms also now. Look at the idioms here. Took the international world of Shakespeare by storm. The idiom is to take something by storm. What does it mean? Then back to back, came and went. It is written and we use it as something that come and go. Curse of the sequel, word filtered back, to pull a trick, to pop up, gone over to the dark side, the blasted heath. What do these things mean? Now, to take anything by storm means to create a lot of interest in something. You make some kind of a statement and there is a lot of interest generated in it, because it is of such severe or great importance. Sometimes a book becomes a super hit, a film becomes a great hit. We say it took the world by storm, the industry by storm, something that monumental, revolutionary happened. Back to back is one after other, back to back lectures, you have been attending back to back classes. When we say come and go, they come and they are of not much importance, or these kind of people, they come and go. Curse of the sequel, it is often said that sequel can never be as good as the origin, I mean the book that came first. A movie also can never be as good as the movie that came first. The second Godfather never received as many accolades as the first Godfather, the second was a sequel. So, often it is said, that is what is believed. So, curse of the sequel, a sequel always bears the burden of its predecessor. Word filtered back. So, it is not like an announcement was made, but filtered, here whispers and here and there you heard something happening. So, that is word filtered back. To pull a trick, to achieve something. It was not possible, but you pulled a trick, just like a magician pulling a trick. To pop up, coming out here and there. So, these kinds of books keep popping up and then they go. The question of Shakespeare's authorship often pops up here and there. and gone over to the dark side. Now the author has become very edgy. Okay, he is looking at the controversial aspects of something. So, it is a very satiric, that author's tone is satirical. And the blasted heath, okay, the blasted heath of authorship. You have the blasted, this means the cursed heath, the terrain, the cursed terrain of the authorship question. Please look up the dictionaries for more accurate and exact meanings. Look at the third passage now. Like alien autopsies and the second gunman, the belief that someone other than a Glover's son from Stratford wrote William Shakespeare's plays is a conspiracy theory that refuses to die. Doubters started questioning the true identity of the writer in the late 19th century. Ever since then, the theory of an alternate author has flirted with the mainstream, as some scholars and researchers have tried to get the broader academic community to treat the question as a legitimate debate instead of the ramblings of crackpots. Now, almost 300 Shakespeare skeptics have made a very public plea to be taken seriously. Now, this is again a very satirical kind of a passage, that look at the tone. Here are your questions. So, what is the conspiracy theory being talked here? And explain. Alien autopsies and the second gunman flirted with, and a legitimate debate. What is the meaning of these expressions? We are talking about idioms now. So, conspiracy theory is someone who killed John F. Kennedy, was that the second gunman. So, therefore, that in the next question you are given, the second gunman, was there Lee Oswald was the only gunman, or was there a second gunman also? So, that theory has never died out. Alien autopsies, that means aliens have been sighted and there has been a post-mortem done on that, whether it is true or not. So, these are conspiracy theories that always are in circulation, just like the question of Shakespeare's authorship of his plays, and flirted with, toyed with the idea, did not really go in depth, but try to find out whether it is true or not. I mean, just touched upon the idea or theory, and a legitimate debate, a discussion that has some kind of proven backing, theoretical backing, or some kind of evidence. So, legitimate debate. Let us look at the fourth slide now, fourth reading slide. Please look at the slide. In the harshly controlled feudal society governed for over 250 years by the descendants of Tokugawa Ieyasu, and look at the use of parenthesis here. Creativity came not from its leaders, a conservative military class, but from the two lower classes in the Confucian social hierarchy, the artisans and merchants. Although officially denigrated, they were free to reap the economic and social benefits of this prosperous age. The tea ceremony, which had been adopted by every class during the Momoyama period, provided the medium in which literary and artistic traditions of the past were assimilated and transformed by highly cultivated men of both the bourgeoisie and the court. By the late 1630s, contact with the outside world was cut off through official prohibition of foreigners. In Japan's self-imposed isolation, look at the choice of hyphenated words. I am also trying to draw your attention to things we have already done before. So, look at the verse, cut off is a phrasal verb, yeah. So, self-imposed hyphenated isolation. self-imposed, sorry, a hyphenated word. So, self-imposed isolation, an isolation that has been imposed on themselves. Nobody did that to them, they themselves wanted to remain isolated. Traditions of the past were revived and refined and ultimately parodied and transformed in the flourishing urban societies of Kyoto and Edo. Restricted trade with Chinese and Dutch merchants was permitted in Nagasaki, and it spurred development of Japanese porcelain and provided an opening for Ming literati culture to filter into artistic circles of Kyoto and later Edo. Now, look at the wealth of vocabulary here. Very often you ask how to develop grammar and vocabulary. Look at the way sentences are constructed, commas are used, vocabulary is used. Let me take you through the harshly controlled feudal society. The artisans and merchants denigrated, officially denigrated. You see, denigrated is to put someone down, and officially denigrated means these social classes, the artisans and merchants were officially denigrated, were put down. They did not occupy the higher echelons of the Japanese feudal society. So, and then look at the words like assimilated. Assimilated is integrated. Self-imposed isolation, that means cut off, but this cutting off was done voluntarily. It was self-imposed, nobody forced them to do this. And a literati culture, now this is a very elegant word. Literati culture is something related to literature, and to filter into artistic circles. So, filter from literature into other kinds of arts, especially in the cities of Kyoto and Edo. So, filter into is an example of phrasal verb. I read on and look at the slide again. By the end of the 17th century, 3 distinct modes of creative expression flourished. The Renaissance of Heian culture, accomplished by aristocrats and cultivated Kyoto townsmen, was perpetuated in the painting and crafts of the school that later came to be called Rinpa. In urban Edo, which assumed a distinctive character with its revival after a devastating fire in 1657, a witty, irreverent expression surfaced in the literary and visual arts, giving rise to the kabuki theatre and the well-known wood block prints of the floating world or ukiyo-e or ukiyo-e. In the 18th century, a Japanese response to the few threads of Chinese literati culture introduced by Ming Chinese monks at Manpukuji, south of Kyoto, resulted in a new style known as Bunjin-ga, that is literati painting, or Nan-ga, painting of the southern school, after the Ming term for literati painting. Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, these various styles were embraced by Japanese artists and artisans as distinct but non-exclusive and complementary modes of expression. Again, look at the elegance of sentences and the language. Now, cultivated Kyoto townsmen, that is sophisticated Kyoto. So, Kyoto has always been a center of sophistication and refinement. So, this is what we mean by cultivated. Some people may have all the money in the world, but they can never be cultivated. But people cultivate themselves with arts, with literature. Okay, so that's how it happens. So, these and various other words also. So, this is the kinds of passages. Now, do not get intimidated by the difficulty or by the difficult level of these passages. We have done quite challenging passages today for reading as well as for listening. But this is exactly the kind of passages that you may you should expect. Nothing less would do. I am just showing them or doing this exercise with you so that you revise, or just you keep in mind that this is the level of difficulty that you are going to encounter for higher order exams. Now, look at the questions. How did creativity start in feudal Japan? What was the significance of the tea ceremony in Japanese society? What were the consequences of Japan's trade with other countries? What were the three distinct modes of creative expression that flourished in the late 17th century? Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, these various styles were embraced by Japanese artists and artisans as distinct but dash and dash modes of expression. And these are your answers. So, how did creativity start in feudal Japan? Creativity came not from its leaders, a conservative military class, but from the two lower classes in the Confucian social hierarchy and the artisans and merchants. So, this is what you have to write, that creativity happened through the lower classes. What was the significance of the tea ceremony in Japanese society? The tea ceremony provided the medium in which literary and artistic traditions of the past were assimilated and transformed by highly cultivated men of both the bourgeoisie and the court. That is the answer. What were the consequences of Japan's trade with other countries? Restricted trade with Chinese and Dutch merchants was permitted, and it spurred development of Japanese porcelain and provided an opening for Ming literati culture to filter into artistic circles of Kyoto and later Edo. Okay, so that is the a consequence of Japan's trade. What were the three distinct modes of creative expression that flourished in the late 17th century? Look at the slides here. Three distinct modes of creative expression: Heian culture, okay, and then next in urban Edo, that is giving rise to wood block and prints of floating world, or ukiyo-e or ukiyo-e, and then a new style known as bunjin-gwa or nan-ga. These are the three distinct modes of creative expressions. And last one, throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, these various styles were embraced by Japanese artists and artisans as distinct but non-exclusive and complementary modes of expression. This is your answer. Now, I will take you to these collocations. Collocations, as we saw last time, they are the words that go together. So, in this passage itself, we have seen a list of collocations, an array of very elegant collocations like harshly controlled, conservative military class, social hierarchy. These words go together. Highly cultivated, self-imposed isolation, just to name a few. So, these are the examples of collocations. Now, I am giving you this exercise. Please look at the slide here. Collocations: dash mistake, dash crowd, dash driver, dash roads, dash house, dash familiar, dash silent, dash fickle. And what are you expected to do? Use these words: vaguely, notoriously, eerily, costly, congested, motley, haunted, rash. Now, for example, you are not going to say congested mistake. You are not going to say rash house. You can never say that. You can never say eerily fickle. These words just do not go together or do not collocate. So, take a moment and see how you can use this set of words with this set. So, collocate. And here are your answers: costly mistake, motley crowd, rash driver, congested roads, vaguely familiar, haunted house, eerily silent, notoriously fickle. Of course, there could be some exchange also, but these are the words that best go together. You cannot say motley driver, for instance. You can say and you can't say notoriously house. So, it has to be notoriously fickle. You can't say motley fickle. You can't say costly fickle. So, this is the way collocations work. Look at the slide, this I am taking you back to the Japanese passage. Creative expression, cultivated townsman, distinctive character, devastating fire, these are all examples of collocations. Irreverent expression, visual arts. This is the way these things are, this is done, okay, collocations are done. So, students, we have done a number of exercises throughout this 30 hours course. I do hope that you have benefited from this course, and whenever you try to appear for your competitive exams in English, you go through our course and try to revise and remember whatever we have done. A parting word of advice is that English language for competitive exams, all kinds of exams that test your language in competitive setups or settings, they expect you to use extremely formal language. You should display an ease with language. Do not bring your spoken language into your written language. In other words, avoid slang and colloquialism. Slang and colloquialism are those kinds of languages or words that we use in everyday writings, in emails to friends, informal situation, in cartoons, or even SMSing, texting, especially in all this in informal situations. In spoken language, words like pretty much, cool, dude, chill, this thing rocks, I killed it, all these are examples of informal. Please do not use them in interviews or group discussions or any formal setting where your written abilities are tested. So, this is the advice that I wanted to give you, and thank you very much for being a part of this course.